I'm Christoph, 34 years old. And 3 years ago, I was just another tech dreamer from a blue-collar Michigan family. Everything changed at my cousin Amanda's wedding, when my dad publicly humiliated me about my business ambitions. Little did he know that exactly 1 year later, I'd sign a contract worth $4.3 million. That moment at the reception table planted a seed of determination inside me that would grow into something nobody in my family could have imagined. Before I tell you how I went from being the family joke to the success story nobody saw coming, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button. And subscribe if you want more stories about turning rejection into massive success. I grew up in a modest brick house in the suburbs of Detroit. Our neighborhood was filled with hardworking families just trying to make ends meet. My father, Richard, worked at the same automotive factory for over 30 years. He believed in the security of a steady paycheck, union benefits, and the reliability of a traditional career path. To him, the greatest achievement in life was finding a stable job and holding on to it until retirement. Risk-taking was foolishness, and entrepreneurship was for trust fund kids who could afford to fail. My mother, Elaine, was kind and nurturing, but she never contradicted my father's harsh assessments of my ambitions. She'd comfort me in private after one of his lectures about getting serious and finding real work, but never actually stood up to him. "Your father just wants what's best for you," she would say, with a sympathetic pat on my shoulder. "He's seen too many people lose everything chasing dreams." Then there was my older sister, Melissa. She followed my father's life advice to the letter. She became a nurse right out of college, secured a position at the local hospital, bought a sensible house, married an electrical engineer, and started a family by 26. In our household, she was the sensible one, while I was labeled the dreamer, the impractical one, the disappointment. The signs of my entrepreneurial spirit appeared early. At age 8, I ran the most profitable lemonade stand in our neighborhood, charging premium prices for my secret recipe that included fresh mint from our garden. By 12, I was fixing computers for neighbors and teachers, earning enough to buy my first programming books. During high school, I created a website that helped students coordinate study groups and exchange notes, which spread to 3 other schools before I graduated. My father watched these endeavors with a mixture of amusement and concern. "When are you going to outgrow these little projects?" he'd ask. To him, these were childish games, not the foundations of a potential career. When college application time came, I wanted to study computer science. My father pushed for something more practical, like becoming an electrician or pursuing a business degree that could land me a stable corporate job. We argued for weeks, until my mother negotiated a compromise. I could study computer science if I also got a part-time job to help pay tuition and prove I understood real work. College opened my eyes to possibilities my father couldn't imagine. I met other students building apps and launching startups from their dorm rooms. I joined coding competitions, networked with tech entrepreneurs, and spent every spare moment outside my part-time retail job learning about software development and business models. During my junior year, I launched my first startup with 2 classmates. We created a scheduling application for small businesses that gained a few hundred users, but ultimately failed when our server costs exceeded our revenue. We shut it down after 8 months. That failure became my father's favorite evidence that entrepreneurship was a foolish path. At every family gathering for the next 2 years, he'd find a way to bring it up. "Remember that computer thing you tried? How much money did you lose on that?" Again, he would say, not really expecting an answer, but making sure everyone heard the question. After graduation, I took a job at a software company to build my skills and connections, but kept working on side projects. The tension with my father grew when I quit that stable job 2 years later to launch another startup. This time I was developing innovative inventory management software for restaurants. Living in a cramped apartment with secondhand furniture and driving a car that broke down every other month, I poured every dollar into building my business. The financial strain was intense. There were nights I ate ramen for dinner to save money, and days I worried about making rent. But I believed in what I was creating. My family watched with a mixture of concern and judgment. During our weekly Sunday dinners, the conversation inevitably turned to when I would get a real job. My father would scan my worn clothes and tired face with disapproval. "How long are you going to chase this fantasy?" he asked, once passing me extra mashed potatoes, as if poor nutrition might be affecting my decision-making. Tony's son just got hired at the plant. Management track. Benefits from day one. My cousin Amanda was the only family member who showed genuine interest in my work. She had moved away to Chicago to pursue fashion design, another career path my extended family considered impractical. We bonded over being the family black sheep during holiday gatherings. "They just don't understand people like us," she told me once while we hid in the kitchen during a particularly judgmental Thanksgiving dinner. "But someday they'll see what we've been trying to build." Little did I know that her wedding would become both my lowest point and the catalyst for everything that followed. Amanda's wedding was scheduled at an upscale vineyard resort about 2 hours from Detroit. When the invitation arrived 6 months in advance, I immediately RSVP'd, despite knowing it would stretch my already thin finances. Amanda had supported me when nobody else in the family did, and I wouldn't miss her special day. The weeks before the wedding were particularly difficult. A promising investor had pulled out of negotiations at the last minute, leaving me scrambling to keep my fledgling company afloat. I had to let go of my only part-time developer and take on freelance coding jobs just to make rent. Sleep became a luxury as I juggled client work with developing my own software. I calculated exactly how much gas money I needed for the round trip to the wedding venue. My ancient Honda Civic wasn't reliable for long distances, but I couldn't afford repairs before the wedding. I just prayed it would make the journey without breaking down. The morning of the wedding, disaster struck. My car refused to start. After an hour of attempted troubleshooting and a call to a mechanic friend, I got it running, but had lost precious time. I raced to get dressed in my only suit, which I noticed had a small stain on the lapel that I tried to scrub out with limited success. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock, and I arrived at 2:30, missing the entire service. I slipped into the reception venue as discreetly as possible, scanning the room for my assigned table. The coordinator directed me to a table near the back where my parents, sister, and her husband, and several judgmental aunts and uncles were already seated. "Nice of you to join us," my father said as I took the empty chair beside him. His tone carried that familiar blend of disappointment and sarcasm. "Car trouble again." Yes, I admitted, feeling everyone's eyes on me, but I got it fixed. I wouldn't miss Amanda's wedding. My mother gave me a sympathetic smile, while my sister Melissa shook her head slightly. Her husband Tom pretended to be deeply interested in the centerpiece arrangement. "You should talk to Tom about getting a good deal on a reliable vehicle," my father suggested loudly. "That's what adults do, they plan ahead." I smiled tightly and turned my attention to congratulating the other relatives at the table, trying to steer the conversation away from my transportation issues. For a brief moment, it seemed to work. My Uncle Phil asked what I'd been up to lately, and before I could filter myself, my passion for my business broke through. "Actually, I'm working on some exciting new inventory management software for restaurants." I explained, genuine enthusiasm in my voice. "It helps track ingredients, reduce waste, and predict ordering needs using artificial intelligence. I've got meetings with some potential clients next month that could really take things to the next level." I realized my mistake immediately. The table had gone quiet, and I could feel my father shifting in his seat beside me. "Still playing with your computer games, huh?" he said, his voice rising. "When are you going to grow up and get a real career?" I tried to explain that software development was a real career with significant earning potential, but he cut me off with a loud laugh that turned heads at neighboring tables. "He thinks he'll ever be rich," my father announced to the entire table, his voice carrying through the reception hall. "He can't even afford the gas to drive here." The silence that followed lasted only seconds before my uncle joined in with a chuckle, which gave permission for the rest of the table to laugh as well. Even my sister covered her mouth, but her eyes revealed she was laughing behind her hand. I sat frozen, my face burning with humiliation. Across the room, I caught Amanda's eye. She had clearly overheard, and her face reflected embarrassment and pity. On what should have been her perfect day, my family had created an uncomfortable scene. "I managed to get here just fine," I said quietly, but no one was listening anymore. My father had already moved on, loudly discussing how Tom's promotion at the engineering firm was the perfect example of how to build a proper career. The remainder of the reception passed in a blur. I picked at my food, unable to enjoy the carefully selected menu. I offered a stiff congratulations to Amanda and her new husband during the receiving line, but couldn't bring myself to stay for the dancing portion of the evening. As I walked to my car alone in the growing darkness, I heard my name called. It was Amanda who had slipped away from her guests to catch me before I left. "I'm so sorry about what happened in there," she said, her elaborate white dress catching the light from the venue behind her. "It's not your fault," I assured her. "And this is your day. Don't worry about me." She hugged me tightly. "Promise me you won't give up. Not everyone thinks like they do." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. As I drove home in my unreliable car, every mile marker seemed to taunt me with my father's words. The humiliation burned inside me, transforming slowly into something harder and more determined. By the time I arrived back at my small apartment, the shame had crystallized into resolve. I would prove them all wrong. Not just for revenge, but because somewhere beneath my father's cruel laughter, I still believed in what I was building. I sat down at my computer that night and worked until sunrise, fueled by a new determination. "I'll show them all," I whispered to myself, as the first light of dawn crept through my window. Every single one of them. The weeks following Amanda's wedding were some of the darkest of my life. The public humiliation had cut deeper than I wanted to admit. Each morning I woke up hearing echoes of my father's laughter and the mocking faces of my family members around that reception table. Depression settled over me like a heavy blanket. I found myself questioning everything about my path. Maybe my father was right. Maybe I was just a dreamer chasing fantasies while my peers built real careers and real lives. I started browsing job listings for corporate software positions that would offer stability and a regular paycheck, the kind of job that would finally earn my father's approval. My financial situation deteriorated rapidly. I received a late notice on my rent, then a final warning. My credit cards reached their limits. I sold my laptop and worked from a 6-year-old desktop computer I had refurbished myself. One morning I opened my refrigerator to find only a half bottle of ketchup and some questionable lunch meat. Rock bottom came on a rainy Tuesday when my car finally gave up for good. The repair estimate exceeded the vehicle's value, and without transportation, my ability to meet potential clients vanished. I sat on the curb outside the mechanic shop, rain soaking through my clothes, and seriously considered calling my father to admit defeat. Instead, I walked 3 miles to a coffee shop where I could use the Wi-Fi. My plan was simple: update my resume and start applying for corporate jobs that same day. As I nursed a single cup of coffee for hours, I overheard a conversation at the table behind me. "We're hemorrhaging money on inventory," a man in an expensive suit was saying to his colleague. "The restaurants can't accurately predict what they'll need, so they overorder, then waste product, then underorder, and can't serve menu items. It's killing our profitability across all 17 locations." My ears perked up. This was exactly the problem my software was designed to solve. Before I could talk myself out of it, I stood up and turned around. "Excuse me," I said, my heart pounding. "I couldn't help overhearing your conversation. I might have a solution to your inventory problem." The men looked surprised, then skeptical, as they took in my rain-dampened clothes in desperate expression. But something in my confident description of my software caught their attention. The older executive, Frank, handed me his business card. "Send me an email with more information," he said in a tone that suggested he was merely being polite. I raced to the public library, dried myself under the hand dryer in the bathroom, and crafted the most professional email I could. Frank never responded. I sent follow-up emails. Nothing. I called the company and couldn't get past the receptionist. 2 weeks of persistent attempts yielded no results. Instead of giving up, I researched local industry events where restaurant group executives might attend. With the last of my money, I bought a ticket to a food service technology conference, ironed my one decent shirt, and practiced my elevator pitch 100 times in the mirror. The conference was intimidating. Everyone seemed to know each other, moving in established social circles, while I wandered the periphery trying to spot Frank or anyone from his restaurant group. After hours of working up my courage to approach strangers, I had collected a stack of business cards but no solid leads. As the event was winding down, I noticed a small group gathered around someone giving an impromptu demonstration on a tablet. Curious, I edged closer until I could see that they were looking at restaurant management software. The presenter was pointing out features, while the others nodded appreciatively. "The problem is," the presenter concluded, "it still doesn't solve the predictive ordering issue. Nobody has cracked that yet." Actually, I heard myself say before I could reconsider, I think I have. The group turned to look at me, and I recognized one of the observers as Jordan Lewis, a well-known angel investor in the restaurant technology space. My mouth went dry, but I forced myself to continue. I've developed an AI-driven system that analyzes historical ordering data alongside variables like weather forecasts, local events, and seasonal trends to predict inventory needs with 87% accuracy. Jordan raised an eyebrow. That's a bold claim. I can prove it, I said, though. At that moment, I wasn't entirely sure how, given my limited resources. To my surprise, Jordan handed me his card. Email me a demo video by tomorrow, and we'll talk. I spent that night creating a demonstration video on my ancient computer, which crashed twice during rendering. I finished just before dawn and sent the file, then collapsed into an exhausted sleep. 3 days later, Jordan called. He wanted to meet in person. The meeting took place at a small restaurant where Jordan ordered coffee for us both. He asked pointed technical questions about my software that revealed his deep understanding of both restaurant operations and technology. I answered honestly, acknowledging limitations but emphasizing the core innovation. Your algorithm is impressive, Jordan said finally. But your business plan needs work, and you're clearly operating on fumes. I couldn't deny it. I hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. I might be interested in a small investment. He continued, watching my reaction carefully. Enough to give you runway to refine the product and approach some test clients. But I'd need 20% equity. It was more equity than I wanted to give up, but I was in no position to negotiate. We shook hands on the deal, and within a week, $50,000 appeared in my new business bank account. That first investment changed everything. I could afford a workspace outside my apartment, basic equipment upgrades, and most importantly, I could bring on a part-time developer named Marcus to help refine the code. We worked 18-hour days, improving the user interface and expanding the predictive capabilities of the software. Small wins began accumulating. 3 local restaurants agreed to beta test our system. The results weren't perfect, but the restaurant owners saw enough potential to provide testimonials. We secured meetings with larger restaurant groups, each presentation smoother than the last. Jordan introduced me to other potential investors, and while most passed on the opportunity, each meeting taught me to better articulate my vision. My confidence grew with each small step forward. 6 months after hitting rock bottom in the rain outside that mechanic's shop, I had a functioning product, a growing list of interested clients, and enough income to move to a slightly better apartment. I even bought a used but reliable car, retiring my bus pass with no small amount of satisfaction. When Sunday dinner invitations came from my parents, I now had legitimate business commitments to use as excuses. The distance gave me space to focus on building something without the constant weight of their disapproval. The wedding humiliation still burned in my memory, but it had transformed from a source of shame to a source of fuel. For 6 months after Jordan's investment, I lived and breathed my software. Marcus and I worked relentlessly to improve every aspect of the product, from the algorithm's accuracy to the user interface. We gathered feedback from our beta testers and made countless adjustments. The local restaurants using our system reported reduced waste and more accurate ordering, proving the concept worked in real-world conditions. Jordan regularly checked in, sometimes offering advice, other times just listening as I worked through challenges aloud. He never mentioned additional funding, but I sensed he was waiting to see if I could transform the promising start into something truly valuable. On an otherwise ordinary Tuesday morning, I received an email that initially looked like spam. The subject line read, "Potential Partnership Opportunity," and it came from an address at Global Dine Technologies, one of the largest restaurant management systems in the country. My finger hovered over the delete button before curiosity won out. The email was from Alexandra Bennett, Vice President of Product Development at Global Dine. She had apparently heard about my software from one of our beta testers, a restaurant owner who also sat on a technology advisory board with her. She was interested in seeing a demonstration. I read the email 5 times, convinced it must be some elaborate phishing attempt. I researched Alexandra online and confirmed she was indeed an executive at Global Dine. With shaking hands, I crafted a response, trying to sound professional rather than desperately eager. To my shock, she replied within the hour, suggesting a video call for the following week. I immediately called Jordan, who tempered my excitement with practical advice. This is potentially huge, he acknowledged. But don't get ahead of yourself. They might just be checking out the competition or looking for ideas to copy. Prepare thoroughly and manage your expectations. The intervening days passed in a blur of preparation. Marcus and I worked around the clock to polish our demo. I practiced my presentation until I could recite it in my sleep, anticipating every possible question about our technology. When the scheduled time for the video call arrived, I was stunned to see not just Alexandra on my screen, but 4 other GlobalDine executives as well. They introduced themselves with corporate formality: the Chief Technology Officer, the Director of Strategic Partnerships, the Head of Restaurant Relations, and a Senior Software Architect. My mouth went dry as they launched immediately into technical questions about our algorithm scalability concerns and integration capabilities. The software architect, Bradley, was particularly skeptical, challenging our approach to data processing and predictive modeling. Your sample size is too small to make these claims, he argued after I explained our accuracy rates. A handful of local restaurants doesn't translate to enterprise-scale deployment. I acknowledged the limitation, but explained how our system was designed to improve with more data. The architecture actually becomes more effective at scale, I said, walking them through the technical details, with confidence I didn't entirely feel. The meeting ended with polite thanks, but no clear indication of their interest level. I sat staring at my blank screen afterward, unsure whether to feel encouraged or defeated. 3 days later, Alexandra emailed again. They wanted an in-person demonstration at their headquarters in Chicago the following week. They would cover my travel expenses. The GlobalDine headquarters occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown skyscraper. I arrived an hour early, waiting nervously in the lobby until an assistant escorted me to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The same executives from the video call entered along with 2 additional people introduced as members of their technical team. Alexandra explained that they wanted to see a live demonstration with their own test data. We've prepared a data set from 20 of our client restaurants, she said, sliding a flash drive across the table. We'd like to see how your system handles it. This was an unexpected challenge. I hadn't anticipated having to run their data through our system on the spot. I took a deep breath and plugged in the drive. For the next hour, I worked through their data, explaining my process as the software ingested and analyzed the information. The room was silent except for my voice and the clicking of keyboard keys. I could feel their eyes tracking every move, looking for weaknesses or shortcuts in our technology. When the analysis completed and the predictive model generated its first forecasts, Bradley leaned forward with interest. These projections account for variables we haven't been able to effectively quantify, he admitted, pointing to specific elements in the results. How is your algorithm weighting seasonal factors against promotional activities? I explained the core innovation of our approach, watching as the technical team exchanged meaningful glances. The energy in the room shifted from skepticism to cautious interest. At the end of the 3-hour meeting, Alexandra walked me to the elevator. We're impressed with what we've seen, she said carefully. We'll be in touch about next steps. I flew back to Detroit, both exhausted and energized. Jordan tempered my excitement again, reminding me that large corporations move slowly and that interest didn't guarantee a partnership. True to his warning, 2 weeks passed with no word from GlobalDine. I sent a polite follow-up email and received a brief response that they were still evaluating. Another week of silence followed. Just as I was beginning to lose hope, Alexandra called. We'd like you to come back to Chicago, she said without preamble. Our team has some ideas about potential integration paths. And Christopher, she added, you might want to bring your legal representation this time. The implication was clear they were serious enough to begin discussing terms. The problem was, I didn't have a lawyer. I couldn't afford the type of corporate attorney who normally handled such negotiations. Jordan connected me with Diane, a lawyer who sometimes worked with his portfolio companies. Her usual fee was far beyond my budget, but she agreed to a reduced rate with a success percentage if a deal materialized. They're interested in either acquiring your technology outright or establishing an exclusive licensing arrangement, Diane explained, as we prepared for the meeting. Your job is to convey confidence in your product's value without appearing desperate for the deal. Back in Chicago, we were escorted to a different conference room. This one dominated by a long mahogany table. Diane's presence beside me lent credibility I sorely needed as we faced the expanded Global Dine team, now including their legal counsel. The meeting opened with Alexandra outlining their interest in integrating my predictive ordering system into their existing platform. What followed was a complex discussion of technical requirements, implementation timelines, and transition processes. I answered their questions with growing confidence, acutely aware that every detailed response increased the perceived value of what I'd built. After 2 hours, their chief financial officer finally broached the subject of compensation. "We're prepared to offer $1.2 million for exclusive rights to your technology," he stated, sliding a document across the table, "with potential performance bonuses if implementation meets specific benchmarks." The figure momentarily stunned me into silence. It was life-changing money, far more than I had dared to hope for at this stage. I felt Diane's subtle warning touch on my arm, reminding me not to react visibly. "We appreciate the offer," Diane responded smoothly. "We'll need time to review the details." In our hotel that evening, Diane explained why we shouldn't accept the initial offer. "Your technology solves a problem that's costing them millions annually across their client base, and it gives them a significant competitive advantage. 1.2 million is them testing your inexperience." Over the next 3 weeks, negotiations continued through a series of calls and emails. Each exchange was a nerve-wracking exercise in patience as we countered their offers and they responded with revised terms. The process was emotionally exhausting, filled with moments of hope followed by disappointment when they held firm on certain points. The final meeting took place a month after their initial offer. I had barely slept the night before, running calculations and scenarios in my head until dawn. Diane and I arrived at Global Dine headquarters to find only Alexandra, the CFO, and their lead attorney present. "We've reviewed your counterproposals," the CFO began without preamble. "And while we can't meet all your terms, we've prepared a revised offer that we believe addresses your core concerns." He slid a new document across the table. The figure on the first page read $4.3 million. I maintained my poker face with superhuman effort as Diane reviewed the terms. The deal included the upfront payment, a transition support contract, and performance bonuses that could potentially add another $1 million over 3 years. After a brief private consultation with Diane, who confirmed the terms were favorable, I agreed to the deal in principle. We would finalize the paperwork within the week. As we left the building, I waited until we were alone in the elevator before letting my professional facade crack. $4.3 million, I whispered, the reality finally sinking in. Diane smiled. "Congratulations. You've just changed your life." The week between agreeing to the deal and actually signing the contract was surreal. I moved through my daily routine in a fog, unable to fully process what was happening. Diane worked with Global Dine's legal team to finalize the paperwork, occasionally calling me to clarify technical details or discuss specific terms. Jordan was the first person I told about the deal. We met at the same small restaurant where he had offered his initial investment. $4.3 million, he repeated, shaking his head with a smile. "I knew you had potential, but even I didn't see this coming so quickly." His 20% stake meant he would receive $860,000 from the deal, an excellent return on his $50,000 investment in less than a year. "What will you do first?" he asked. I hadn't allowed myself to think that far ahead. "Pay off my debts," I said automatically. "Get a car that actually starts every time. Maybe an apartment where the shower doesn't leak." Jordan laughed. "Those are good starts, but think bigger. This isn't just money, it's freedom and opportunity." The signing ceremony took place at Global Dine's headquarters in a conference room I was now becoming familiar with. Alexandra and the executive team were present, along with several people I hadn't met before, who were introduced as implementation specialists who would be working with me during the transition period. The contract itself was intimidatingly thick. Diane had explained every clause to me beforehand, but seeing it all assembled drove home the magnitude of what was happening. With cameras documenting the moment I signed my name on multiple pages, officially transferring the technology I had built from scratch to Global Dine Technologies, Alexandra handed me a ceremonial check for the cameras, though the actual funds would be wire transferred later that day. We shook hands and posed for photos that would appear in industry publications, and Global Dine's annual report. "We're excited to have you on board for the transition period," Alexandra said, for the benefit of the cameras. "Your expertise will be invaluable as we integrate this innovative technology into our platform." The reception afterward was brief but surreal. I sipped champagne and made small talk with executives who had barely acknowledged me during earlier meetings. Several handed me their cards, mentioning future opportunities or suggesting lunch meetings. On the flight home, I kept checking my bank account on my phone, half expecting the transfer to be revealed as some elaborate mistake. When the notification finally appeared confirming the deposit of $4,300,000 minus Diane's fee, which had been handled separately, I had to stifle an inappropriate laugh that threatened to burst from my chest. My first major purchase was indeed a car, though not the luxury vehicle many might have expected. I chose a reliable mid-range sedan that wouldn't draw attention, but would never leave me stranded again. The salesman seemed disappointed when I paid in cash rather than financing, clearly hoping for a larger commission on a more expensive model. I moved from my cramped apartment to a modest but comfortable two-bedroom condo in a secure building. Nothing ostentatious, but clean, modern, and mine. For the first time in my adult life, I bought furniture that wasn't secondhand and kitchen appliances that weren't on the verge of breaking down. The transition work with Global Dine kept me busy for the first few months. I traveled regularly to Chicago to help their development team understand the intricacies of my code and the logic behind the algorithm. They were integrating my technology into their larger platform, which required careful attention to detail and problem-solving on the fly. As part of the deal, I had agreed not to develop competing restaurant inventory software for 3 years, but that still left numerous other potential avenues for my next venture. I began researching possibilities, excited by the freedom to explore ideas without the immediate pressure of generating income. 6 months after signing the contract, a technology blog ran a feature story about Global Dine's new predictive inventory system, which was already generating significant improvements for their clients. The article mentioned me as the original developer, quoting Alexandra's praise for my innovative approach to a persistent industry problem. That article led to others, and soon I was receiving invitations to speak at industry conferences about entrepreneurship and technology innovation. People who had never returned my calls were suddenly eager to meet for coffee and pick my brain about their own ventures. The media narrative of my overnight success amused me. Reporters focused on the dramatic contrast between my struggling startup and the multi-million-dollar acquisition, painting it as a Cinderella story of tech entrepreneurship. None of them knew about the years of work, the countless rejections, or the wedding incident that had fueled my determination. With some of my newfound capital, I began building a small team to explore new business opportunities. I hired Marcus full-time as my technical lead, brought on a business development specialist named Sophia, and contracted with a marketing consultant to help shape our brand identity. We established a modest office in a co-working space, deliberately avoiding the trappings of startup excess that I'd seen sink other newly funded companies. No ping-pong tables, no beer on tap, no extravagant launch parties. Just smart people working on interesting problems. As my professional life stabilized into this new reality, I found myself thinking more about my family. I hadn't spoken to any of them since the contract signing, unsure how to navigate our relationship in light of my changed circumstances. The humiliation from the wedding still lingered, mixed now with a complicated sense of vindication. The decision about how to handle my family was postponed when my phone began lighting up with notifications one morning. Global Dine had issued a press release about their quarterly earnings, specifically highlighting how my technology had improved their client retention and expanded their market share. The release mentioned me by name and included the acquisition amount. Within hours, local business publications had picked up the story. By afternoon, my success had become public knowledge in my hometown. And that's when the messages from family members began flooding in. The first family member to reach out was my sister Melissa. Her text message arrived the same day the news about Global Dine's earnings went public. "Just saw the article about your software company. Congratulations. We should catch up soon." The casual tone, as if we'd simply fallen out of touch rather than avoided contact after my public humiliation, made me set the phone down without responding. 3 more messages from Melissa followed throughout the day, each slightly more pressing than the last. I was in the middle of a meeting with my small team when my mother called. Against my better judgment, I stepped out to take it. "Christoph, Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. Is it true what they're saying on the news about your computer program? It's true, I confirmed, keeping my tone neutral. Globaldyne acquired my software. There was a pause, then a muffled sob. We're so proud of you, she said, her voice cracking. I always knew you could do something special. I should have said something when your father. I should have defended you. Her tears were genuine, but they came far too late. Where was this support when I was struggling? When I was humiliated at the wedding? When I needed someone to believe in me? Thanks, Mom, I said, unable to fully reciprocate her emotion. I need to get back to a meeting. Over the next few days, the floodgates opened. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years sent friend requests on social media. Aunts and uncles who had laughed along with my father at the wedding sent congratulatory texts. A second cousin I barely remembered messaged asking if I was interested in investing in an exciting new business opportunity. Most messages I left unanswered. For those I did respond to, I kept my replies brief and non-committal. I wasn't ready to let these people back into my life simply because my bank account had additional zeros. A week after the news broke, my father finally called. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message while sitting alone in my new living room. Christoph, it's Dad. His voice sounded exactly the same, neither particularly proud nor apologetic. Your mother says I should call to congratulate you on your business deal. So, congratulations. Call us back when you get a chance. No acknowledgement of his mockery. No recognition of how he had belittled my dreams for years. Just a perfunctory congratulations that sounded like it had been extracted under duress. I didn't call back. Amanda was the only family member whose call I eagerly accepted. Unlike the others, she had believed in me before the money had supported me when it counted. I knew you could do it, she said, genuine joy in her voice. When I saw the news, I screamed so loud my husband thought something was wrong. Our conversation flowed naturally, catching up on her life in Chicago and my new ventures. She never asked for anything, never hinted at financial assistance or opportunities. She simply wanted to share in my success as a friend would. Have you talked to Uncle Richard yet? She asked carefully near the end of our call. No, I admitted. He left a message, but I haven't called back. He's been different since the news broke, she said. Quieter. I think he might actually feel bad in his own way. I changed the subject, unwilling to discuss my father's potential regrets. As weeks passed, the barrage of family communications settled into a persistent trickle. My mother called every Sunday without fail, updating me on family news, as if we'd never lost touch. I listened politely but shared little about my own life. Melissa's approach shifted from casual texts to more direct attempts at reconciliation. We should have dinner sometime, she suggested. Tom and I would love to hear about your company. I finally agreed to meet them at a restaurant midway between our homes. The dinner was awkward, with Tom asking technical questions about my software that revealed he'd researched it thoroughly beforehand. Melissa alternated between reminiscing about childhood memories and making comments that betrayed her curiosity about my new financial status. We just refinanced our mortgage, she mentioned casually over dessert. The interest rates are brutal right now. I nodded non-committally, refusing to take the bait. By the end of the evening, both seemed disappointed that I hadn't offered financial assistance or investment in Tom's vague side business ideas. The most difficult family encounter came at Thanksgiving, 3 months after the Globaldyne deal went public. After much persuasion from my mother, I agreed to attend the traditional family gathering at my parents' home. Walking into that familiar house, carrying an expensive bottle of wine, felt like stepping into a parallel universe. The same living room where my father had lectured me countless times about getting serious now displayed a framed copy of the business magazine article about my success. My mother had positioned it prominently, as if my achievement somehow reflected well on their parenting. Relatives who had previously ignored me at family functions now clustered around, asking questions about the tech industry and making comments about how they had always known I was smart. Several pulled me aside throughout the evening to mention business ideas or children who needed college tuition help. My father remained on the periphery of these interactions, watching with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. It wasn't until after dinner, when most relatives had moved to the living room for dessert, that he approached me in the relative privacy of the kitchen. Your mother says I should apologize. He began awkwardly examining the floor tiles rather than meeting my eyes, for what I said at the wedding. I waited, giving him space to continue. I didn't think your computer stuff would amount to anything, he admitted. I was wrong about that. It wasn't exactly the heartfelt apology I might have once craved, but it was probably the closest thing to admission of error my father had ever offered anyone. Yes, you were wrong, I agreed simply. He nodded once, then changed the subject to ask about my new car, a safer topic than the emotional terrain we'd briefly approached. Throughout the holiday season, I navigated similar interactions with extended family members. Some were genuinely happy for my success, while others clearly saw me as a potential solution to their financial problems. I became adept at recognizing the signs. The too friendly reconnection attempts from distant relatives. The coffee invitations that inevitably turned into pitches for investment opportunities. The sob stories about medical bills or mortgage troubles. With Jordan's guidance, I established clear boundaries. I created a small family education fund to help cousins with college expenses, but administered it through a third party to avoid direct requests. For everything else, I learned to say no firmly but politely. Your success doesn't obligate you to solve everyone's problems, Jordan reminded me during one of our regular mentoring sessions. Being generous is admirable, but enabling entitlement isn't helping anyone. As the months passed, a natural sorting occurred. Family members interested only in financial gain gradually stopped calling. When it became clear, I wouldn't be their personal ATM. Those who genuinely wanted to rebuild relationships persisted accepting my boundaries and showing interest in my life beyond my bank account. My relationship with my parents evolved into something new. Not the close bond some families enjoy, but a careful, respectful distance. My mother made consistent efforts to connect, sending thoughtful messages and asking questions about my work that showed she was trying to understand my world. My father never directly apologized again, but his behavior changed subtly. He stopped making dismissive comments about technology and occasionally asked questions about my new ventures that suggested genuine curiosity rather than skepticism. 1 year after the Global Dine contract, I received a small package from my father. Inside was a business card holder made of polished wood, with my initials carved into it. The accompanying note read simply, "Thought you could use this, Dad." It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation in the traditional sense, but it was acknowledgement, and for now that was enough. 1 year after signing the Global Dine contract, I found myself in a completely different life than I could have imagined that rainy day outside the mechanic's shop. The professional transformation was the most visible, from struggling entrepreneur to successful business owner with a growing team and reputation. My company had expanded beyond just me and Marcus to a team of 11 people working on 2 promising new software products. We had moved from the co-working space to our own modest office, deliberately choosing function over flash. Instead of the stereotypical startup environment with beanbag chairs and arcade games, we created a professional space that reflected our serious approach to innovation. The transition work with Global Dine had concluded successfully. Their implementation of my inventory system was generating significant results across their client base, reducing waste by an average of 22% and improving ordering accuracy by 35%. They had already paid the first performance bonus, and metrics indicated the second would likely be achieved as well. Industry recognition had followed. I had been featured in several technology publications and invited to speak at conferences about entrepreneurship and innovation. People who had previously ignored my emails now reached out to network, and investment opportunities arrived regularly in my inbox. But the personal transformation was more profound than the professional one. Weekly therapy sessions had helped me process the complex emotions surrounding my family relationships and sudden wealth. I had learned to set boundaries without harboring resentment, to acknowledge the pain of the past without letting it dictate my future. Success doesn't erase trauma, my therapist reminded me during one particularly difficult session, but it can provide the resources to heal from it properly. Those resources included not just therapy, but the freedom to make choices based on values rather than necessity. I could choose which projects to pursue based on interest rather than immediate profit potential. I could select team members who shared my vision rather than whoever would work for minimal compensation. I could walk away from toxic situations instead of enduring them for financial survival. My relationship with my father remained complicated. We had established a cautious peace, interacting with civil politeness at family gatherings, but rarely one-on-one. He never directly acknowledged the wedding incident again, after his brief attempt at apology, but his behavior had changed in subtle ways. The turning point came unexpectedly at a family barbecue in July. I overheard him talking to my Uncle Phil about my latest venture. Christoph always had a different way of looking at problems, my father said, unaware I was within earshot around the corner of the house. Even as a kid, he'd find solutions nobody else thought of. I didn't understand his computer work, but turns out he knew what he was doing all along. It wasn't a declaration of being wrong, or an explicit apology. But from my father, this admission to another person represented significant growth. He was rewriting his narrative about me, which meant he was capable of change, however incremental. When I decided to forgive him, it wasn't because he had earned it through some grand gesture of contrition. I forgave him because carrying the resentment was exhausting, and because I recognized that his limitations were part of his own wounds and upbringing. This forgiveness wasn't for him, but for myself, freeing me from the emotional burden that had driven me, but also constrained me. My mother had made more explicit efforts at reconciliation, regularly calling and genuinely trying to understand my work and life. During one Sunday call, she tearfully acknowledged her role in enabling my father's criticism. "I should have stood up for you," she admitted. "I was so afraid of conflict that I stayed silent when I should have spoken up. I'm sorry, Christoph." Her genuine remorse made it easier to rebuild our relationship. We would never have the close bond some mothers and sons enjoyed, but we established a new foundation based on mutual respect rather than expectation and disappointment. My sister Melissa and I found an unexpected path to reconciliation through her son, my nephew Trevor, who showed an early interest in computers and programming. When Melissa asked if I would talk to him about technology careers, I discovered a genuine pleasure in mentoring a young mind unburdened by our family's complicated history. With other family members, I maintained boundaries while remaining open to genuine connection. Some relationships healed naturally over time, while others remained distant by mutual, unspoken agreement. 6 months after signing the contract, I finally visited Amanda in Chicago, bringing an absurdly expensive wedding gift to make up for the one I couldn't afford at the time. We spent a weekend exploring the city, talking about our parallel journeys as the family outsiders who had forged our own paths. "Do you ever wish you could go back to that wedding day and tell yourself what would happen?" she asked as we walked along Lake Michigan. "I'm not sure I would," I replied after considering the question. That humiliation became fuel. Without it, I might not have pushed so hard. Financial success had changed certain aspects of my life, but left others remarkably untouched. I still preferred simple meals to extravagant restaurants. I still wore comfortable, practical clothing rather than designer labels. My condo, while nicer than my old apartment, remained modest by the standards of what I could afford. The most meaningful use of my new resources came from helping others who reminded me of my former self. I established a scholarship fund for young entrepreneurs from working-class backgrounds, providing not just financial support but mentoring and connections. Watching these hungry, innovative minds pursue their visions with the support I had lacked brought a satisfaction that no luxury purchase could match. Jordan remained a trusted advisor and friend, guiding me through the complexities of managing wealth and building a sustainable business. "The first million is about proving yourself," he told me once. "Everything after that should be about creating the life and impact you want." With his encouragement, I began making angel investments in promising startups, particularly those with founders from underrepresented backgrounds. Each investment decision was guided not just by potential return, but by whether the founder had the resilience and determination I recognized from my own journey. Looking back on the 3 years since that humiliating moment at Amanda's wedding, I realized the true value of the journey wasn't measured in the millions in my bank account. It was measured in the resilience I had developed, the wisdom I had gained, and the opportunity to build something meaningful on my own terms. My father's mocking laughter at that wedding reception table had once been the sound of my greatest shame. Now it served as a reminder of how far I had come, not just financially, but emotionally. The success that followed wasn't about proving him wrong, though it had certainly done that. It was about proving myself right. The lesson I carried forward wasn't that revenge is sweet, though the vindication had indeed been satisfying. It was that true success comes from within, from believing in yourself when no one else does, from persisting when logic suggests surrender, from maintaining your integrity, even when success finally arrives. As I built my new ventures and mentored aspiring entrepreneurs, I often shared a piece of wisdom that summarized my journey. When people mock your dreams, don't waste energy trying to convince them. Channel that energy into proving them wrong. Then when success comes, don't waste it on revenge. Use it to build the table where everyone who believed in you gets a seat. What about you? Have you ever had someone laugh at your dreams or goals? How did you respond? And did it fuel your determination? Drop a comment below to share your story. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about overcoming obstacles and finding success against the odds. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message today, share this video with them. Remember, sometimes the people who believe in you the least can motivate you the most. Thank you for listening, and never stop believing in your vision, even when you're the only one who sees it.